The evening was buzzing with energy. Bright lights, flashing cameras, and the constant hum of conversation filled the grand hall. It was one of those events where everyone in Hollywood wanted to be seen, a night where careers, reputations, and personal moments all seemed to collide under the glittering chandeliers. People were dressed in their finest. Laughter echoed through the corridors, and for a moment, it seemed like the world had paused to watch this one gathering among the crowd. Keanu Reeves moved quietly, almost unnoticed. Unlike many celebrities who thrived on attention, he had always been calm and humble. He didn't push himself into conversations or seek the spotlight. People admired him not only for his work, but for the way he carried himself with quiet dignity and kindness. That night he was no different. He was walking slowly, exchanging polite nods and small smiles, enjoying the moments without making a show of them. But in one corner of the hall, the atmosphere shifted. Will Smith, confident and outspoken, noticed Keanu and decided to make a comment. It wasn't loud enough to disturb the entire room, but those nearby could hear it. His words were sharp, subtle, and designed to embarrass. It was the kind of remark that could make anyone feel small if they weren't prepared. Some people laughed quietly, thinking it was just a joke, but others sensed the tension. It wasn't just casual teasing, it carried a hint of challenge, a test to see how Keanu would react. Keanu, however, didn't react immediately. He paused for a moment, his eyes steady, his expression calm. There was no anger, no visible frustration. People watching him realized something important. He wasn't rattled. That pause, that silence, seemed louder than the words themselves. It was as if he was thinking carefully, considering the situation. Rather than reacting on instinct, the crowd started to notice. People leaned in slightly, curious to see what would happen next. In Hollywood, reactions to moments like this often define how someone is seen. A sharp comeback could make the room erupt with laughter, but a misstep could lead to awkwardness that lasts for weeks. Everyone around sensed that this was one of those rare moments where the next words mattered more than the event itself, even in the midst of all the flashing cameras and the noise of the event. There was a strange kind of stillness around Keanu. People realized he had a presence that didn't need words to be felt. He didn't need to raise his voice or demand attention. His calm and steady demeanor was already speaking volumes. Some of the other guests whispered quietly among themselves. "Is he going to respond?" one asked. "I've never seen anyone handle things like this without getting defensive," another said. It was a reminder that, in a world full of ego and showmanship, humility and patience often stood out more than loud words or flashy gestures, and so, the first part of the night ended with a quiet tension. The room continued to buzz with chatter, laughter, and music, but there was a subtle undercurrent. People were watching, waiting. They wanted to see how this interaction would unfold. Would there be a confrontation? Would Keanu say something sharp back? Or would he continue to hold his calm, letting his presence alone make the statement? For now, all anyone could do was watch, feeling the anticipation in the air. In that moment, it wasn't about fame or movies, it was about character, composure, and the quiet power of patience. And in Hollywood, that was something that truly made people pause. The minutes stretched on, and the tension in the room grew almost tangible. People were still talking, laughing, and moving around, but there was a small circle forming around Keanu. No one was pushing forward. Instead, everyone was watching quietly. It was like the room had subconsciously agreed to pause, waiting for the next move. The energy shifted from casual chatter to something more electric, a sense that a small moment could turn into something memorable. Keanu didn't rush. He kept walking slowly, nodding politely to those who greeted him, but every step felt deliberate. His calmness was not just about staying composed, it was about control. He didn't want to give the impression of reacting out of emotion. In Hollywood, reactions are often judged more than intentions. A wrong glance or a quick remark could be twisted into a headline. But Keanu seemed to know that. He was fully aware of the eyes on him, and yet, he did not let it disturb his inner balance. Some guests began whispering quietly. "I've never seen someone stay so calm under pressure," one said. Another added, "It's like he's not even noticing." "That's impressive." Even staff and assistants in the hall noticed the unusual calm, a sharp contrast to the subtle drama that had unfolded moments earlier. Meanwhile, Will Smith appeared to be expecting a reaction. His posture was slightly tense, his eyes searching for a sign of discomfort. He smiled, trying to appear casual, but there was a clear sense of expectation. He wanted a response, preferably one that would make Keanu flinch. But Keanu's silence was more powerful than any words. It didn't show fear or anger. It showed patience and a quiet strength that made the entire situation feel off balance for the first time. Some people around started comparing reactions silently. They knew Hollywood well enough to see patterns. Usually, someone who is teased or challenged would fire back with a quick comeback. That kind of instant response often wins applause, but it also risks humiliation if it fails. Keanu, however, seemed to understand something deeper. He seemed to know that real strength didn't come from sharp words. It came from being steady when others tried to shake you. As the tension grew, a few people noticed something interesting. Keanu wasn't just silent. He was listening. He was paying attention not only to the words that had been said, but also to the emotions behind them. There was no rush, no pressure. He wasn't trying to prove anything in that moment. Instead, he seemed to be gathering his thoughts, preparing for a response that would matter, not just for himself, but for everyone witnessing the scene. Even the lighting of the hall seemed to highlight him. Cameras flashed, but the focus felt almost accidental, as if the universe itself was noticing the calm in the center of chaos. People whispered about it quietly, unsure if anyone else had noticed. He doesn't even look bothered. How is he doing that? It wasn't arrogance or ignorance. It was something rare, a kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing who you are and not letting anyone else dictate your reaction. For a few moments, the world seemed to slow. Laughter in the corners of the hall faded into background noise. Conversations continued, but with a softer tone, almost like the energy of the room had shifted toward anticipation. People were curious, and curiosity can be a powerful thing. It creates attention, and attention gives meaning to even the smallest actions. Some staff who had worked in Hollywood for years admitted later that moments like this were rare. They had seen arguments, jokes, and jabs countless times, but rarely had they witnessed a pause that was so calm, so magnetic, that it drew everyone's focus without a single word. It was more than patience, it was presence. Keanu's mere composure was making people rethink what it meant to handle pressure in a public setting. Even Will Smith seemed to realize that the silence wasn't weakness. There was no frustration, no visible struggle. It was almost as if Keanu's stillness had created a mirror, reflecting the attempt at provocation back on its source. Those nearby noticed a shift in his demeanor too. What was meant to embarrass now felt strangely ineffective. He could still smile, could still speak later, but the room's attention had quietly moved toward Keanu. And that subtle shift mattered more than anyone could have predicted. The whispers continued. "I think he's waiting for the right moment," someone said. Another added, "Whatever he's going to say, it's going to be something unforgettable." And indeed, the anticipation in the room was not just about curiosity, it was about respect. People respected that Keanu was not being hasty. They respected that he seemed fully in control of himself in a situation where many would have lost composure. For Keanu, the silence was not just tactical, it was natural. He was being himself. He wasn't trying to win a battle or score a point. He simply understood the value of observing before reacting. In a world obsessed with quick reactions, instant tweets, and viral moments, taking a pause was a quiet form of courage. And by holding that pause, he had already made the evening feel different, making people notice not just the tension, but the grace in handling it. As the music played softly in the background and conversations resumed with a lighter tone elsewhere, a circle remained around Keanu. People were still waiting. Not for drama, not for anger, but for something meaningful. It was a lesson in itself, a reminder that sometimes silence speaks louder than words. The tension wasn't gone, but it had transformed into something powerful. A sense that what came next would matter even more because the first part of the story had already been told without a single word, and so the evening continued with that subtle, charged energy. Keanu walked slowly, acknowledging greetings and nodding politely, but the anticipation never left the room. People kept stealing glances, sensing that the next moment, whenever it came, would be remembered. For now, the lesson was clear. Staying calm, listening, and holding your ground could speak louder than any immediate response ever could. The moment seemed to stretch on forever, and everyone in the room was holding their breath. Cameras flashed, staff paused their movements, and even the background chatter softened as if the hall itself knew something important was about to happen. Keanu Reeves, still calm and composed, finally stopped walking. He turned toward the small circle of people who had gathered, and his eyes met those of Will Smith. There was no anger, no bitterness, just quiet clarity and attention. People leaned in, almost instinctively, knowing that whatever Keanu said next would change the energy of the room. It wasn't about proving who was right or winning a fight. It was about how a human being handled pressure, embarrassment, and expectation. In that moment, Keanu became more than a celebrity. He became a lesson in composure and respect. Then he spoke. His voice was steady, soft, and deliberate. He didn't raise it, he didn't add drama, but every word carried weight. The first thing he did was acknowledge the moment without turning it into an attack. He didn't make fun of anyone. He didn't respond with sarcasm. Instead, he spoke in a way that made everyone around him think, reflect, and, most importantly, feel a sense of respect for his presence, what we say to each other in public. In moments like this has the power to affect people more than we realize, Keanu began. His eyes were calm, but they were sharp, observing. We can try to put someone down or we can lift each other up. That choice is ours. And sometimes the best answer is not the loudest one, it's the one that shows understanding and patience. The words hung in the air, and there was a brief silence. People were processing what they had just heard. This wasn't a quick comeback or a witty line meant to win applause. This was something deeper. This was wisdom wrapped in simplicity. Keanu's reply wasn't about shame or revenge, it was about perspective. Will Smith blinked, caught off guard. He had expected a sharp retort, a flash of defensiveness, maybe even embarrassment, but this wasn't it. Keanu's calm, thoughtful response flipped the energy completely. Those around them noticed the subtle shift. The tension that had been building moments ago started to dissolve. The eyes that had been curious or judgmental were now filled with admiration. People began whispering to each other, quietly as if they didn't want to break the spell of the moment. "Did you hear that?" One said. "He didn't attack, he just made everyone think." Another added, "I've never seen someone handle a situation like this without getting defensive. It's incredible." Keanu didn't stop there. He went a step further, adding a personal touch that made his response even more meaningful. "We are all here to share moments, to celebrate achievements, and to support each other. Trying to shame someone doesn't add value to any of us. It only takes away from what we can create together." The words were simple, but the impact was huge. Instead of escalating the situation, he had turned it into a lesson in kindness, patience, and emotional intelligence. People were visibly impressed. Some even smiled, recognizing the rare quality of someone who could remain so composed under scrutiny. Even Will Smith seemed to shift. There was a pause, a moment of reflection, as he realized that the attempt to embarrass had completely backfired, not in a humiliating way, but in a way that highlighted Keanu's character. The room was no longer focused on conflict. It was focused on respect. And that respect came naturally, without force, without showmanship. As the applause started to build, it was quiet at first, tentative, but soon grew. People were clapping not because of drama, not because of confrontation, but because they had witnessed something genuine and inspiring. It was a rare moment where humility, wisdom, and presence had won over tension, leaving everyone around with a sense of awe. What made it even more memorable was that Keanu didn't gloat or try to make anyone feel bad. He didn't make Will Smith look small. Instead, he made the moment about human decency. The room felt lighter, as if a small cloud of tension had lifted. People began to relax, to smile, and to appreciate the way a simple response could change the energy of an entire event. Some journalists, who were covering the event later admitted that this was a defining moment. Not for gossip or scandal, but for the reminder that actions, words, and calmness in the face of provocation could leave a lasting impression. Fans who heard about it online were inspired, commenting on how Keanu's reply was a perfect example of patience, respect, and understanding in a world that often rewards the opposite. Keanu's reply didn't just address the immediate moment. It also set a standard for how people could handle conflict in public without losing dignity. He had shown that reacting with grace instead of anger could be more powerful than any quick, witty comeback. And more importantly, it reminded everyone present that real strength often lies in self-control and empathy, rather than loud words or dramatic gestures. By the end of the moment, the energy in the room had completely shifted. People were talking, but now the topic wasn't gossip or tension, it was admiration for the way Keanu had handled himself. Even those who had been skeptical or critical found themselves nodding in agreement, quietly respecting the calm wisdom he had shown. The cameras kept flashing, capturing not just the interaction but the expressions of everyone around. Smiles, nods, and subtle gestures of approval filled the frames. It wasn't a flashy, dramatic moment, but it was one that people would remember. And for Keanu, it wasn't about the recognition, it was about staying true to himself and showing that respect and patience are never outdated qualities. By the time the applause quieted down, the lesson had been made clear. You don't have to fight negativity with negativity. You don't have to respond to every challenge with anger or sarcasm. Sometimes the best reply is thoughtful, calm, and kind. It's a reply that doesn't just address the moment, it changes it entirely. And in that crowded, glittering hall, under the bright lights and watchful eyes of Hollywood, Keanu Reeves had done just that. He had turned a potentially embarrassing confrontation into a moment of reflection, admiration, and respect. It was a reminder that real strength isn't shown through loud words or dramatic gestures, but through calmness, thoughtfulness, and integrity. The moment Keanu finished speaking, the energy in the room shifted completely. What had started as a tense and uncomfortable interaction slowly transformed into a scene filled with respect and admiration. People began to look at each other, realizing that they had all just witnessed something rare. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't dramatic, but it was meaningful. It was the kind of moment that stayed with people long after the event ended. Guests who had been chatting and laughing nervously before now stopped for a second, exchanging glances. There was a quiet understanding among them. What Keanu had done wasn't just about answering a challenge. It was about showing a level of composure and grace that most people rarely saw, especially in a world obsessed with instant reactions and viral moments. People could feel it, almost like a wave moving through the crowd. The tension that had been thick moments before had evaporated, replaced by a sense of awe. Some of the celebrities in the room whispered among themselves, quietly analyzing what had just happened. "Did you see that?" one asked. "He didn't even attack or get defensive, he just handled it perfectly." Another nodded. "It's like he's teaching everyone how to be calm under pressure." Even the staff and security, who had seen countless interactions over the years, were impressed. They had been trained to notice conflicts, to be ready for drama, but this was something entirely different. It wasn't about conflict anymore. It was about respect. The media covering the event immediately sensed the significance of the moment. Photographers and reporters, who were often chasing the latest gossip or scandal, suddenly had a story that was different, one about wisdom, patience, and integrity. They started capturing images of the reactions of the people around Keanu, knowing that those expressions told as much of the story as the words themselves. Reporters quietly whispered to each other about how unusual and powerful the interaction was. Social media began to catch wind of it almost immediately. Within minutes, clips and quotes were being shared online. Fans and followers commented on Keanu's calmness, praising his humility and maturity. People admired how he had turned what could have been an embarrassing moment into a lesson about patience and respect. It wasn't just another celebrity feud or drama, it was something inspirational. The comments reflected a mix of admiration, surprise, and even relief. Because the story wasn't about conflict, it was about grace under pressure, Even those who had initially found the situation awkward or uncomfortable began to feel a sense of relief. The tension had been replaced by a quiet warmth. People realized that the event didn't have to be about embarrassment, rivalry, or judgment. It could be about something more human, something that reminded everyone why they were there in the first place, to celebrate achievement, connection, and shared experiences for Will Smith. The ripple effect was subtle but noticeable. It wasn't about public embarrassment or shame. Instead, it was a quiet, internal reflection. The attempt to create discomfort had not worked, and instead, it had highlighted Keanu's character. Observers noted the change in posture, the softer expression, and the small nods of acknowledgement. Even without saying anything, there was a recognition that the situation had shifted. It was no longer about confrontation, it was about mutual understanding. Even if unspoken, the ripple effect didn't stop with those immediately around the interaction. People who had been watching from a distance began to retell the moment to others, quietly, like passing along something precious. "You have to hear this," one guest said to another. "He didn't attack. He just said something that made everyone pause and think." Word spread quickly, and soon it became the most talked-about moment of the evening. The story traveled from guest to guest, from table to table, and eventually reached people who weren't even at the event. It wasn't just admiration that people felt. It was inspiration. People started reflecting on their own lives and how they handled conflict. Keanu's calm, thoughtful response made them realize that responding with patience and kindness could often have a stronger impact than reacting with anger or defensiveness. Some even admitted to themselves that they had rushed into situations before without thinking, and seeing someone handle it with such grace was a reminder of a better approach. The journalists and reporters covering the event quickly recognized the value of this story. It wasn't scandalous, it wasn't sensational, and it wasn't filled with drama. Instead, it was real, meaningful, and human. They realized that highlighting moments like this could inspire readers and viewers in ways that ordinary celebrity gossip never could. They started drafting their articles, focusing not on conflict but on the strength, humility, and patience Keanu had shown. Fans online continued to share clips and quotes, praising Keanu's reply and reflecting on the lesson it carried. They admired how he had stayed composed, addressed the situation thoughtfully, and turned a potentially negative moment into something positive. The response sparked discussions about character, integrity, and emotional intelligence. People talked about how admirable it was to face a challenge without resorting to insults, sarcasm, or defensiveness. Even weeks later, the story continued to resonate. People who had attended the event, worked there, or seen the clips online remembered the moment vividly. They spoke about it as an example of how composure and respect could create a lasting impression. The ripple effect had extended far beyond the room that night. It wasn't just a Hollywood story, it was a story about human behavior, kindness, and the impact of thoughtful words. Keanu's reply had also influenced others in the room to act differently. Some people who were prone to quick judgments or impulsive reactions paused to think before speaking in similar situations. They realized that moments of tension didn't have to lead to conflict, and that choosing patience could create a stronger, more positive outcome. The ripple effect, in this sense, was not only about admiration but also about influence, quietly encouraging others to consider how they could handle challenges in their own lives. By the end of the night, it was clear that something remarkable had happened. The interaction between Keanu Reeves and Will Smith, which could have been remembered as a small moment of tension or embarrassment, had instead become a story of respect, composure, and influence. People left the event talking about it, remembering it, and sharing it with others. It had become more than just a single conversation, it had become a lesson for everyone who witnessed it, both in person and online. And so, the ripple effect continued long after the cameras stopped flashing and the music quieted down. It was a moment that reminded people that words have power, that composure is rare and valuable, and that kindness and patience can change the energy of an entire room. In a world often focused on drama and conflict, Keanu's calm response became a shining example of how one person's actions could influence many. creating a wave of respect and reflection that would last far beyond that night. Days passed after the event, but the story didn't fade. People who had been there remembered it vividly, talking about the moment as if it had happened only hours ago. What had been a tense and potentially embarrassing situation had transformed into something meaningful, and everyone who witnessed it, or even heard about it, later felt the impact. It wasn't just a story about celebrities. It was a story about character, patience, and the power of human behavior. News outlets and social media continued to highlight the incident. Videos and clips of Keanu's calm, thoughtful reply spread quickly. Fans, journalists, and ordinary people alike were amazed at how simple words, spoken with composure, could have such a strong effect. Comments and posts praised his humility, kindness, and wisdom, and people began to reflect on how they could apply the same principles in their own lives. It became clear that this wasn't just entertainment. It was a lesson in handling conflict with grace. Keanu's reply had changed the way people looked at confrontation. Before, the expectation in Hollywood and even in everyday life was often to react quickly, defend oneself aggressively, or make a sharp remark. But what he had shown was different. By choosing patience, thoughtfulness, and calm, he had turned a potentially negative situation into a positive one. People realized that strength doesn't always come from fighting back. It often comes from self-control and understanding. Even weeks later, the ripple effect continued. People who had been at the event shared the story repeatedly, talking about how it had made them pause and reconsider how they handled their own challenges. Some admitted they had rushed into arguments or reacted in ways they later regretted. Seeing someone like Keanu demonstrate such patience and respect encouraged them to try a different approach in the future. It was inspiring not just because it was unusual, but because it was real and relatable. The impact wasn't limited to the people who had attended the event. Fans online shared the story widely, praising Keanu's words and actions. They talked about how he didn't make anyone feel small, didn't escalate the tension, and instead showed a sense of wisdom and understanding that many people admired. The story sparked conversations about humility, emotional intelligence, and the importance of staying calm under pressure. People began to appreciate that true influence doesn't come from making a scene, it comes from the quiet power of presence, patience, and thoughtfulness, even within the industry. The story became a reference point. People talked about it during interviews, panels, and discussions, highlighting how Keanu's response had not only diffused a tense moment, but had also elevated the standard for handling public interactions. It was a reminder that fame or attention doesn't have to be used to show dominance or superiority. It can be used to demonstrate character and integrity. This subtle lesson resonated with many, both inside and outside Hollywood. Will Smith himself seemed to reflect quietly on what had happened. There was no public confrontation afterward, no argument or tension lingering. Instead, there was a sense of recognition, even if unspoken, that Keanu's approach had been effective. The attempt to create discomfort had backfired in the most graceful way possible, not through humiliation, but through a calm demonstration of strength and patience. Observers noted the subtle acknowledgement and the quiet shift in the room's energy. It was a powerful lesson in how influence often comes from behavior, not words alone. Fans continued to discuss the moment online, many saying they were inspired to be more patient and thoughtful in their own lives. They admired how Keanu had turned a challenging situation into a meaningful lesson without anger, sarcasm, or confrontation. This admiration wasn't just for his celebrity status. It was for his human qualities, the ability to remain composed, think before speaking, and respond with kindness. It was a reminder that real respect is earned through actions, not noise or bravado. Months later, the story was still remembered as a defining moment. People referenced it as an example of how to handle difficult situations with dignity and grace. It became more than a simple celebrity anecdote. It became a case study in patience, emotional intelligence, and personal strength. Teachers, mentors, and leaders could point to it as an example of how words and presence, when used thoughtfully, can have a lasting positive impact. The true lesson of the event went beyond Hollywood. It was a reminder that everyone faces challenges, criticism, or moments of tension in daily life. How we respond to those moments matters. Reacting impulsively or with anger might feel satisfying in the moment, but it often leaves regrets. Choosing patience, calm, and thoughtful words like Keanu did can change not only the immediate situation but also leave a lasting impression on everyone involved. By the time the next high-profile event arrived, the story had already become part of Hollywood lore. People remembered it not for scandal or gossip, but for the example it set. Keanu Reeves had shown that strength, wisdom, and kindness could create influence far more powerful than confrontation or drama. It was a story that resonated with people of all ages, backgrounds, and experiences, reminding them that even small moments of composure and integrity could have a lasting impact. In the end, the incident was more than a single exchange. It became a symbol of patience and respect, a reminder that true power often lies in how we handle ourselves under pressure. Keanu's reply, simple yet profound, had rippled through the room, the industry, and the hearts of fans worldwide. It was proof that even in a world obsessed with attention, drama, and instant reactions, human qualities like humility, patience, and kindness could still shine brighter than any flash of celebrity or gossip. And so, the story concluded not with conflict or tension, but with admiration, reflection, and a quiet sense of inspiration. People remembered it not because of what was said in anger, but because of what was said in calm, because of how it was said with thoughtfulness, and because it left everyone who witnessed it a little wiser, a little more reflective, and a lot more inspired.